Imagine a $13 billion nuclear fortress deployed for 9 months in a lethal, corrosive saltwater desert. Despite holding enough firepower to erase a nation, this mechanical Leviathan will completely self-destruct from within if its freshwater supply fails. How exactly does the U.S. Navy engineer an infinite oasis of pure water from a toxic ocean? Let's unlock the highly classified engineering secrets that make an American supercarrier practically immortal. 400,000 gallons of fresh water, 35,000 parts per million of lethal ocean salinity, 100,000 tons of forged American steel, and 5,000 trapped human lives. Welcome to the brutal, unforgiving reality of modern naval warfare, where a single drop of untreated raw seawater is an absolute death sentence. This warship operates in a hostile environment completely devoid of natural resources. Every single ounce of fluid necessary for sustaining this massive combat operation must be generated internally from the sea. Out here in the wild ocean, the mathematical margin for mechanical error is absolute zero. A Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, specifically designated CVN-68, is a terrifying mechanical Leviathan that constantly devours immense logistical resources. Civilians often assume water is merely utilized for basic crew hydration and mess halls, which is a catastrophic tactical misconception. Pure water is the literal blood surging through the massive twin A-4W nuclear reactors buried deep below the armored waterline. These twin power plants operate at extreme, mind-bending temperatures, constantly pushing the ultimate physical thermal limits of modern engineering. They require a continuous, flawless, uninterrupted flow of 0% mineral water to generate operational steam. If that freshwater supply suddenly vanishes, an apocalyptic domino effect triggers instantly across the entire vessel. Without pure water, the vital thermal exchange violently halts, and the core nuclear reactors rapidly overheat. Automated safety protocols slam shut the entire propulsion grid, causing the vital C-13 steam catapults to completely lose their launch pressure. The immense kinetic energy required to violently hurl a 30-ton combat aircraft into the sky permanently disappears. The entire flight deck immediately goes dead under the scorching sun. Those $65 million F/A-18E/F Super Hornets are completely grounded. The elite $100 million F-35C Lightning II stealth fighters instantly transform into useless, oversized titanium paperweights sitting on a highly vulnerable runway, permanently stripping the supercarrier of its lethal teeth. Picture this nightmare survival scenario. A $13 billion war machine paralyzed, not by a Chinese DF-21 Aoundé hypersonic ballistic missile, but by internal systemic dehydration. You have exactly 72 hours, which is the unforgiving, absolute maximum survival window before the emergency reserves run completely dry. Internal air conditioning fails, instantly turning the lower steel decks into suffocating ovens while critical combat systems crash. Advanced communication arrays falter. Defensive radar screens go totally black, and the mightiest offensive vessel ever constructed simply collapses from within. In the middle of a heavily contested, hostile combat zone, the ocean does not need to fire a single weapon to kill a supercarrier. It just needs to patiently wait for the crew to break. The operational environment on that flight deck is incredibly harsh and physically demanding. How many liters of water do you think a fighter pilot burns through to survive a brutal 12-hour combat shift under 40 degrees Celsius heat? Tell me your exact estimate down below in the comments section. Understanding these invisible yet critical logistics is exactly what separates casual amateurs from elite military strategists. To decode the most extreme, highly classified survival secrets of the modern defense industry, hit like and subscribe right now. By actively subscribing, you guarantee your direct access to this strategic intelligence center every single week. But how exactly do you mathematically squeeze millions of gallons of pure, uncontaminated water out of this toxic ocean? How does this steel behemoth survive while tearing through the waves at 30 knots, heading straight into enemy fire? To decode that survival mechanism, we must descend into the heavily armored bowels of the carrier, dropping 6 decks below the waterline. Down here, Bathed in harsh fluorescent light lies the ultimate lifeline, the flash-type evaporator plant. This is the domain where the United States Navy forcefully bends the natural laws of thermodynamics to its absolute will. It is a massive, hyper-complex labyrinth of copper-nickel piping, titanium valves, and reinforced steel designed to execute one brutal task. The entire desalination cycle is ignited by the terrifying thermal energy generated from the twin A4W nuclear reactor cores. Inside the shielded reactor compartment, controlled nuclear fission systematically splits uranium-235 atoms, pushing the primary coolant loop to 600 degrees Fahrenheit under a crushing 2,000 pounds per square inch of pressure. This heat is transferred to a secondary loop, generating the explosive, high-pressure steam that drives the 260,000 shaft horsepower propulsion turbines, propelling the steel beast through the water at maximum combat speed. However, the Navy's elite engineering crews do not waste a single microscopic joule of this residual kinetic energy. They siphon off a precisely calculated fraction of this thermal power to weaponize the water purification process. In a terrestrial environment at normal atmospheric pressure, roughly 14.7 pounds per square inch, water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, or exactly 100 degrees Celsius. But on a nuclear supercarrier, waiting for thousands of gallons of water to naturally reach that maximum thermal threshold is a catastrophic, unacceptable waste of operational time. Instead, the Mechanical Engineering Division creates an incredibly aggressive artificial vacuum inside massive, four-stage distillation chambers. By dropping the internal chamber pressure down to an extreme subatmospheric level of 0.94 psi, the physical boiling point of the liquid plummets dramatically. Inside these highly pressurized vessels, the freezing cold, raw ocean intake water suddenly flashes into pure steam at a mere 100 degrees Fahrenheit, operating far below its natural boiling state. This is how human ingenuity physically alters reality to guarantee the survival of the crew. This violent, instantaneous phase transition completely separates the pure H2O molecules from the lethal contaminants in a mere fraction of a single millisecond. As the newly formed, uncontaminated steam rapidly rises to the overhead condenser coils to be harvested. What remains at the bottom is a highly toxic, hyper-concentrated saltwater sludge. This dense, corrosive liquid, known as brine, is ejected back into the ocean at a staggering rate of thousands of gallons per hour, distance far from the critical water intake valves. But this intricate thermodynamic ballet is absolutely not immune to the chaotic, destructive friction of high-intensity naval warfare. Imagine the deafening, high-pitched claxons sounding general quarters while the 100,000-ton ship executes a violent, 30-knot evasive maneuver. Suddenly, a primary multi-stage vacuum air ejector suffers a catastrophic mechanical failure due to intense hydrodynamic shock. The artificial vacuum inside the primary evaporator chamber instantly collapses, and internal pressure surges violently back toward normal atmospheric levels, instantly paralyzing the entire desalination process. The physical phase transition of the seawater abruptly stops dead in its tracks. The water completely ceases to boil, the vital steam vanishes, and the production of fresh water instantly drops to absolute zero. Alarms scream through the 60 degrees Celsius engine room as the chief engineer stares at rapidly plunging dials on the main steam accumulators. Up on the active flight deck, a critical emergency sortie of fully loaded combat fighters is desperately waiting to be launched into the sky. The massive C-13 steam catapults require exactly 520 pounds per square inch of stored pressure to violently fling those $100 million jets into the hostile combat zone. The machinist's mates have exactly 45 seconds to manually isolate the ruptured intake valve and physically reboot the backup vacuum ejectors before the massive steam accumulators run completely dry. The desperate engineers are thrown into a brutal fight against physics, violently wrestling with scalding hot steel handwheels in a suffocating environment that feels like the interior of a literal furnace. If you were locked inside a claustrophobic 60 degrees Celsius engine room surrounded by massive metal pipes holding volatile pressures. Would you dare trust your life to this tangled mechanical labyrinth? Drop your honest answer in the comments section below. Flash evaporation is a brilliant physical masterpiece, flawlessly utilizing nuclear fire to sustain continuous operations. But if the primary heat transfer system ruptures during an intense naval engagement, will 5,000 trapped people be left to the merciless agony of extreme dehydration and thirst while surrounded by an ocean of poison? When the delicate thermal exchange shatters and the nuclear steam evaporates, the United States Navy deploys its ultimate tactical failsafe, the reverse osmosis system. This highly advanced secondary purification grid completely abandons the physics of heat manipulation in favor of pure, unrelenting, brutal physical trauma. Rather than gently boiling the toxic ocean, the RO plant utilizes massive high-pressure titanium pumps to force raw, unfiltered seawater through semi-permeable membranes at an agonizing 1,000 pounds per square inch. These synthetic polymer filters possess microscopic pores measuring a mere 0.0001 microns across, violently tearing the pure H2O molecules away from the lethal 35,000 parts per million of dissolved sodium chloride. However, stripping the ocean down to its bare molecular baseline creates a secondary, highly dangerous physiological problem for the human body under extreme stress. Pure, unadulterated H2O is actually highly corrosive to internal metal piping and is completely devoid of the critical electrolytes required to sustain high-intensity combat operations. To prevent widespread muscular cramping and severe physiological degradation among the crew, the Bureau of Medicine and Surgery enforces a strict chemical resurrection protocol. Elite technicians meticulously inject precise microdoses of calcium and magnesium back into the sterile fluid, followed by an exact 2.0 parts per million chlorination shock to brutally eradicate any surviving microbial threats. This raw mechanical power reaches its terrifying apex aboard the $13.3 billion USS Gerald R. Ford, officially designated by the military as CVN-78. This next-generation supercarrier radically rewrites the naval logistical playbook by aggressively severing the historical, crippling reliance on traditional pressurized steam propulsion loops. By replacing the archaic steam catapults with the revolutionary Electromagnetic Aircraft Launch System, or EMALS, the massive vessel suddenly liberates thousands of megawatts of trapped thermal energy. This incredible electrical surplus allows the highly automated reverse osmosis arrays to continuously operate at maximum efficiency, pushing the daily freshwater production limit to an unprecedented extreme. Yet, despite this cutting-edge, multi-billion-dollar computer automation, the true survival of the warship ultimately rests on the heavily bruised shoulders of the enlisted machinist mates. These warriors are the unsung phantoms of the deep, operating in the darkest, most claustrophobic mechanical abysses located directly adjacent to the main propeller shafts. Down in these cramped, unforgiving compartments, natural sunlight is an absolute myth, and the ambient temperatures routinely hover at a suffocating, miserable 60 degrees Celsius. The relentless, bone-rattling roar of the massive reduction gears constantly screams at a deafening 120 decibels, relentlessly pushing human psychological endurance to the absolute breaking point. Consider a catastrophic damage control scenario during a high-intensity kinetic engagement against a sophisticated, near-peer adversary operating in highly contested, dangerous waters. A near miss from an enemy heavyweight torpedo sends a violent hydrodynamic shockwave directly into the supercarrier's heavily armored titanium hull, violently shaking the vessel. The extreme kinetic impact instantly jams the primary high-pressure discharge valve on the main reverse osmosis membrane array, mechanically locking it completely shut under immense strain. Within a few terrifying milliseconds, an explosive surge of hydraulic back pressure threatens to completely rupture the entire filtration system, potentially flooding the lower vital decks with freezing, toxic seawater. Automated sensors scream in failure as the digital overwatch systems crash, transferring the terrifying burden of survival back to the raw, unyielding human element. The primary triage medical bay currently flooded with critically wounded sailors from a catastrophic flight deck fire. Desperately needs a continuous stream of clean water to scrub surgical instruments. A lone machinist's mate has exactly 45 seconds to manually override the crippled system, grabbing a massive steel wrench to forcefully bleed the jammed, highly pressurized flow lines. Using sheer, raw physical strength, they violently muscle the colossal relief valve open against a crushing 1,000 pounds per square inch of counterforce, tearing the skin from their own palms to keep the pure water flowing. In the absolute darkest, most terrifying moments of war, would you choose to entrust your actual life to a fully automated, computerized water filtration machine, or the calloused, bleeding hands of the machinist's mates buried deep inside the ship's hull? This incredibly vital, continuous liquid bloodstream directly guarantees the massive $13 billion warship does not silently become a highly radioactive, destroyed floating tomb in the cold, unforgiving abyss. But did you actually know that this exact same technological survival system has completely redefined the entire fundamental doctrine of modern maritime warfare and the absolute balance of global geopolitical power? This microscopic manipulation of saltwater directly bursts the most terrifying strategic concept within the modern Pentagon tactical playbook, infinite loiter time. While adversary navies operate strictly on a ticking, inescapable logistical countdown, a nuclear-powered Nimitz or Ford-class carrier simply ignores the conventional laws of supply chain attrition entirely. By untethering from the land, the vessel becomes a permanent geographical fixture. Older, conventional diesel-electric warships suffer a fatal strategic weakness on the global chessboard. They are permanently shackled to their highly vulnerable maritime logistics lines. Eventually, those foreign destroyers and cruisers must inevitably abandon their forward patrol sectors and retreat from the active combat zone. They are forced to rendezvous with slow, undefended TAO fleet replenishment oilers, simply to refill their rapidly depleted freshwater storage tanks. The United States supercarrier absolutely does not retreat. It drops its massive metaphorical anchor directly into the center of the hostile theater and refuses to flinch, by endlessly generating its own limitless liquid sustainment from the ocean beneath its keel. The carrier strike group applies a crushing, unrelenting psychological stranglehold over the entire enemy coastline. It waits, it watches, and it never runs dry. However, the profound strategic value of this brutal desalination technology is not exclusively reserved for orchestrating high-intensity global warfare and kinetic destruction. In a jarring, magnificent twist of geopolitical fate, the ultimate machine of human destruction seamlessly morphs into an absolute guardian angel during times of unprecedented civilian crisis. The heavily armed warship changed its primary mission from taking lives to aggressively preserving them. Opened the highly classified after-action reports for Hurricane Katrina in 2005 and Operation Unified Response during the devastating 2010 earthquake in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. These crippled regions suddenly possessed zero functioning water infrastructure. Millions of desperate survivors were trapped in the suffocating rubble, rapidly dying from severe dehydration and rampant waterborne diseases like cholera. Time was running out faster than any medical airlift could arrive. The United States Navy immediately diverted its nuclear-powered supercarriers away from their scheduled combat deployments, rushing them directly to the shattered coastlines. Massive industrial filtration pumps violently roared to life deep within the classified engineering spaces, instead of deploying explosive ordnance. Heavy-duty black supply hoses were aggressively dragged from the armored hulls straight onto the ruined beaches. Picture this deeply cinematic, ultimate paradox. A 100,000-ton behemoth, locked and loaded with enough RIM-16 two evolved Sea Sparrow missiles and guided laser munition to systematically erase an entire sovereign nation from the map. Yet, instead of launching precision airstrikes, it relentlessly pumped 400,000 gallons of hyper-purified, remineralized drinking water directly into the chaotic refugee camps every single day. The machinery of death became the fountain of life. This extreme military engineering does not remain permanently confined to the steel bulkheads of the United States Navy. The exact same thermal and electromagnetic desalination principles have aggressively expanded across the globe. This vital technology has now become the absolute backbone of human survival in some of the harshest, most unforgiving terrestrial environments on the planet. Look directly at the arid, resource-starved landscapes of the Middle East. Nations like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Israel now heavily rely on massive terrestrial desalination plants operating on these exact same thermodynamic blueprints. They are successfully sustaining millions of citizens in the middle of barren deserts, transforming dead sand into thriving, habitable megacities through the sheer brute force of water purification. This paints a profound, breathtaking contrast that completely redefines the very essence of modern military superiority on the complex global stage. True, unrivaled geopolitical sovereignty is no longer just about the capacity to inflict catastrophic slaughter upon your designated adversaries. The absolute pinnacle of power on a rapidly depleting planet is the divine capability to unilaterally banish famine and thirst. In your expert opinion, what is truly the most terrifying weapon possessed by an American supercarrier, its massive fleet of strike fighters loaded with precision smart bombs, or its frightening capability to sustain infinite life without requiring any external assistance whatsoever? Let me know your strategic verdict in the comments below. Water has undeniably forged the invincible, global might of the United States Navy. But as global resources rapidly run dry, will the ultimate weapon of World War III be nuclear missiles, or the very technology to control the last drops of water on Earth? Do not forget to hit like and subscribe so you do not miss our next classified strategic intelligence report.